Welcome to the World of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you so much for joining me as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for the worlds that Obsidian has created for us. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the World of Eora. I'm your host Eric, aka Gingerino. Thanks everyone for joining me on another episode as we dive into the history, lore, and game mechanics for Pillars of Eternity 1, 2, and Avowed. If you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Really glad to have you here. It's really awesome to dive into the fantasy world that Obsidian created for these games. And I know a lot of people out there really appreciate the nuance and the depth of the writing, and this is just a way to explore a lot of these topics and things in the games that we already know and love, or if you're new to the world and you just want to learn a little bit more about what's going on. Now, I do want to get something out of the way. I know that for people who have been listening to the show for a while, you'll recognize I haven't had as many episodes out in the last month or so that I normally do. I apologize for that. I recently got a new job, which is very exciting. I'm glad to have a new job. I'm working in sales for an irrigation company, but it has come with a new schedule, which has unfortunately basically removed all of my normal podcasting time. And on top of that, I kind of had some health concerns that I really needed to focus on and address whenever I did have free time. So I found myself not really sure when to podcast, and I kind of have just been putting it together here or there when I have spare time. I think I've nailed down a couple of times on a weekly basis where I might be able to reliably get behind the microphone to record these episodes, but it's still a learning process for me. So if there is ever a given week or so where there isn't an episode for the next little while, that's why, at least until I settle into a normal rhythm. As a result as well, my episodes I might cut them off at a certain point, so we might split things up into part 1 and part 2, so we'll see what today's episode brings. Anyways, that's all that I want to get out of the way about the podcast itself. I would cover the news, but there's been a whole bunch of stuff about Avowed that has, happened and developed, mostly patch related and people's responses to games, etc., etc. Since there is the chance I might not have an episode out every other week, then I think I'm actually just going to kind of pull back on focusing on the news, because let's be honest, if you're listening to this already, you're probably already on the up and up, and if there is something that I really think is worth mentioning, I'll mention it to you guys. The only noteworthy thing is not even Avowed worthy, is that the Outer Worlds 2 just recently got announced to be in an Xbox showcase in June of this year, which is really exciting if you're following games developed by Obsidian Entertainment. But as far as Avowed and Pillars of Eternity goes, the only really major thing I think is worth noting is that Pillars of Eternity has a patch coming later this year that is going to introduce turn-based mechanics into the game, which of course reignited the debate on Reddit of what is greater, real-time with pause or turn-based. And I am personally of the camp of it doesn't really matter. However you enjoy games is good. And as long as the turn-based mechanic that comes out is really well done, then I'll be happy to see it involved. Personally, and I know this is a little controversial amongst the community, but I'm a real-time with pause fan. Not that I have anything wrong with turn-based. I love turn-based games. I've played a lot of them and will continue to do so. I just have found my own personal tastes to be more in the line of real-time with pause. And I'm not really sure why. Me and a guy on Reddit were talking about it, and I think I like the moment-to-moment control of having characters. I like knowing that, in between my enemies' running or movement action, I can perform an action while they're doing that. So I think I like that moment-to-moment control. But that being said, there are some really great benefits and gamey aspects of turn-based that you just can't get with real-time. So honestly, it comes down to taste, and that's just what mine is. But I'm almost certainly going to be doing a run-through of Pillars of Eternity 1 after this is introduced, just as a good excuse to get back into it. With that being said, let's introduce what today's episode is going to be about. I was going to talk about the History of the Living Lands book series, but I think actually, since I've been replaying the game of Avowed at the third time at this point, and I'm getting back into the Emerald Stair region, I'm realizing that there's a lot of really cool lore associated with the city settlement in Emerald Stair, Fior Mes Iverno, and its founding father, which is Maxim Vidaro. There is actually some really interesting lore about who Maxim is, why he came to the Living Lands in the first place, and why he created the settlement of the Fior Mes Iverno. And I don't think a lot of people realize the Skaenite origins that exist for this Animancy city. But enough of that, let's just dive in straight to the lore.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
So in order to understand what we're talking about today, first let me introduce what Fior Mes Iverno is, just in case you're not sure. So in the game of Avowed, there are these different maps and zones that you progress through, because Avowed is not an open world game, as a lot of us will know. It's open zone, and there are these regions that we move on to. And in the second region, which is called Emerald Stair, the main settlement in that area is called Fior Mes Iverno. Often just shorted to Fior, which is Fior, it's basically known as a safe haven for animancy. And animancy is a science that exists within this world studying the soul. More specifically, it's studying the stuff that souls are made of, which is called essence. And so it's studying the properties of essence. It's studying the different interactions and mechanics of essence. It's answering all those kind of questions from a scientific and academic perspective. However, animancy is fairly controversial throughout the world of Eora because, it's dealing with people's souls, right? Like, there are potential permanent impacts, not in just one person's life, but in future iterations of that soul's future incarnations, because this world runs on a cycle of reincarnation known as the wheel. And so if you did something to a person's soul, right, theoretically speaking, it could affect the next life of that soul, and so on and so forth. So this is a very controversial science that exists because of some of the impacts that it could have. And there are definitely some rather large instances in this world's history where experimentation gone wrong has led to absolute catastrophes within nations or areas or people groups. And so it's not without its merit that there is any level of controversy with it. But the Living Lands being an untamed area of the world, there is no formal regulation, there's no empire, there's no government. The people that are here as animancers are free to engage in the science of animancy as they please. And interesting to note, your player character in Avowed, you come from a nation of Adir, which has actually outlawed animancy entirely. But anyways, Fior Mes Iverno is a city in the Living Lands which is freely and openly studying animancy. It's kind of their thing. And Fior Mes Iverno was founded by a man named Maxim Vidaro, who we don't get to see in person in the game of Avowed. However, his son, Ignacy Vidaro, is the current mayor of the city of Fior. A quick little side note, Fior Mes Iverno is almost certainly a translation in this world of Flower of Winter or Winter Flower, because Iverno is the season of winter in this world, and Fior is very close to the word flower in, I want to say, Italian. The Valian language, which this originates from in-game, is very close to Italian in our real world, so Fior Mes Iverno almost certainly refers to Flower of Winter or Winter Flower, and it's just a little extra lore tidbit for those that are interested in it. Which, who knows, as I read on about this city and about Maxim, maybe I'll have an epiphany of why he called it Winter Flower. Maybe it has something to do with something so beautiful being able to survive even the harshest of elements. So that's like the first thing that pops into mind, but maybe there's something deeper than that. I don't know. I'm not a writer by trade. I am going to be starting off today's lore from pillarsofeternity.fandom.com. There is also another community-based like Wikipedia thing and on Fextra Life for Avowed specifically, but when it comes to this city, there's a lot more information in this article. So we're going to be reading from there. And I'm basically going to give an overview of Fior Mes Iverno and Maxim Vidaro, and then we're going to dive into the specific pieces of lore that we see in the game to expound upon that. So this is going to go into the background of that thing being created. Now, obviously, if you're listening to this and you have not gotten this far in the game, or you haven't explored the area of Emerald Stair thoroughly to have learned a bit about Fior's background, then there are going to be spoilers in today's episode. Nothing in the major narrative, but this is just, if this is stuff you want to learn for yourself to some degree, then spoiler warning for that. But nothing that's going to break the game in half if you're worried about that. Fior Mes Iverno was founded around 2780 AI by Maxim Vidaro. AI is just kind of like, how we say BC or AD or something like that. Then that's just the designation within the calendar, stand for Anni Auricchio, which I've done an episode on if you're interested in learning about it. And 2780 just happens to be the year. Now, if I remember correctly, Avowed takes place around 2831-ish or shortly after that. So this is roughly a century prior that this city was even founded. And it was founded by a person named Maxim Vidaro. Maxim is a former Valian nobleman who orchestrated a significant exodus from the Valian republics. For those curious, Valian republics and Valian noblemen, Valia is often referring to either the Valian republics or Old Valia. There are these three grand empires that exist within the world of Eora: the Aedir Empire, where your player character in Avowed is from, the nation of Rauatai, which is the place that our companion, Kai, actually originally hails from, and then there was Old Valia, or Grand Valia, and it was an opulent grand society, but that has now collapsed. The society basically had a bunch of noble families that were fighting for power, and long story short, that society has crumbled, the civilization has collapsed, and the only thing that is left, however, is the Valian republics, which started out basically as a set of colonies from Grand Valia in a different part of the world. And Maxim Vidaro is a person from one of these Valian republics. And he orchestrated a significant exodus from the Valian republics to settle this city Fior in the Living Lands. Apparently, he was denied a political position within the Sangreta Ducala, which is the ducal congress within the Valian republics. It's part of the governing structure there. He was denied a political position within that governing structure in the city of Spirento. Spirento being one of the major cities in the Valian republics. So Vidaro gathered a group of animancers from this city and set sail for the far side of the world, he basically promised these animancers that they could start fresh in a new place where they were not shackled by the government or restrictions. Not that there probably was a lot of restrictions, but we don't know how he necessarily convinced them to do this, but he convinced these animancers to get up and set sail away from the city of Spirento to start fresh somewhere else, and ends up being the Living Lands. Now, the interesting thing that we learn about Vidaro, and this isn't something that's that difficult to find actually, is that he was a Skaenite. He worshipped the god Skaen, or at the very least he prayed to the god Skaen, and very likely in an effort to cause this exodus in the first place. And so there is a degree to which we could say that if Skaen did answer the prayers of Maxim Vidaro, perhaps Skaen helped influence these animancers to leave Spirento and move to Living Lands to form the city of Fior Mes Iverno. Now, the reason this is important is because Skaen is the god of rebellion and defiance and violence and secret hatred, etc., etc. And if you were, let's say, a person who felt that you were denied your rightful political position within the Ducal Congress, you might pray to the god of Skaen to undo the power of these people who are oppressing you and putting you under their boot, etc. Now, this is a god that you would pray to for that. Now, I want to get this across the way. Like, this could seem like a really positive thing. Like, Skaen he's there for the little guy, like he's there to help the working class get out from under the oppressive boot of the evil corporate overlord or something like that. And you know what? To be fair, Skaen would be the god to pray to for that. However, Skaen has also been connected to a lot of pretty atrocious acts within history. And as we might be able to dive into later in today's episode, there is some pretty awful stuff that Skaenite cults have been responsible for. So Skaen, in my opinion, is not a good god. If anything, he is definitely an evil god. He's not just evil for the sake of being evil, but definitely evil, in my opinion. But anyways, Maxim Vidaro is a person who is worshipping and praying to the god Skaen, very likely because he views the Sangreta Ducala as being oppressive against him. And so he takes these animancers away from Spirento, and this is part of, I would think, Skaenite worship or praise, or was it practical theology? I don't know what it is. the name of it is, but it's essentially living out his faith of he is taking his revenge out on this governing structure, the Sangreta Ducala, by taking away a lot of their very skilled animancers. So like he is getting revenge against the oppressors, and that is a very like pro-Skaen thing to do. This secession was not merely a migration, but a calculated act of defiance and revenge, aimed at establishing a community free from the perceived constraints and injustices of the republics. The settlers, many of whom were indebted or marginalized within Spirento, found in Vidaro a patron and a leader who offered them a chance to forge a new future. So there we have a little bit of a blurb here. And I do have to mention, like, this is all on a community-based Wikipedia thing, and I have found the information to be very reliable. However, there isn't there is not a like source that I can double check this on. But when I was playing the game and doing research for this episode, this all lines up with stuff that we see in game, and I'll dive into that in a second. So basically, this secession was not merely a migration, and so that is kind of alluding to the idea that Vidaro was under the influence of Skaen when he was doing this. This is his act of defiance and revenge that he would have felt justified in as a Skaenite worshipper. And it was aimed at crippling the, I guess, academic or scientific power of Spirento by taking away all these academics and scientists from that city. Now, it says here from perceived constraints and injustices of the Republic, and that's something I definitely think is important, because the Vailian Republics have never struck me personally, within the lore, as a society that would be very anti-animancy. Maybe there's some level of regulation just to make sure they don't blow themselves up or kill everyone in their country. However, I feel like they're very much like learn as much as we can about everything kind of a group, but that's just my opinion based off of right now. But it seems that the settlers viewed themselves as indebted or marginalized enough within Spirento that they followed Vidaro to the other side of the world to forge a new future. Initially established as an animancy commune and intellectual haven within the Living Lands, Fior Mes Iverno quickly flourished. The fertile soil and relative autonomy fostered rapid agricultural development and scientific advancement, allowing the settlement to thrive independently. Over time, Vidaro relinquished much of his direct authority, allowing the community to self-govern. His later years were spent in contemplative solitude, during which his relationship with Skaen evolved, finding a revised understanding of the effigy, which is another name for the god Skaen. Upon his eventual and mysterious departure, his son Ignacy Vidaro assumed leadership, continuing the legacy of Fior Mes Iverno amidst the encroaching threat of the Dream Scourge. So anyways, that next part just kind of talks a little bit more about Maxim Vidaro, that he, established the city of Fior Mes Iverno as a commune of animancers and an intellectual haven within the Living Lands itself. And the city became very successful, especially since they were able to kind of combine the sciences of agriculture with the sciences of animancy to see, like, are there ways that we can use essence, which again is the stuff souls are made of, to improve agricultural methodology or what have you. And they were very successful to some degree. And if you've been in the Emerald Stair region, you can actually see some of this work. You can see these like different tiered sections of, I don't know what it is, honestly. It's some form of agriculture. And you can see that they have these like soul-based machines attached to them, probably suffusing the ground with some level of essence to make it more fertile, perhaps, so that it will have a higher yield. I don't know. There is this one farm that uses undead corpses that have been reanimated as cheap labor to be able to get a lot of this stuff done so that, they can save money and put it elsewhere and perhaps produce more things. And that's all animancy based. So there's a lot that we can see going on in this region. I was personally hoping for, and this isn't like a dig against agricultural industry or anything like that. I was hoping to see something a little bit more esoteric than this when I went to Emerald Stair, because I am such a lore nerd. But I guess it makes way more sense in the game of Avowed and in the Living Lands that animancy would have a very practical application, because this is a place that is hostile to everyone that tries to live in the Living Lands. And so animancy coming in and trying to come up with actual practical solutions to how can we live here in a better way, it makes a lot of sense. I was hoping for something a little bit more metaphysical, but this is honestly, it's pretty cool actually to see animancy being done in a practical way of like, well, how can we make it so that we grow better and bigger apples, or whatever it is that they're doing there. However, because of the Dream Scourge, they have been having issues. in Emerald Stair as of late. And that's something you learn playing through the game in the Emerald Stair region, that they've been having issues with crops, and they've been having issues with everything that's going on, and the Dream Scourge, it's causing a lot of rot and decay. And so there are problems going on right now, and it's not only eroding their ability to have food, but it's eroding a lot of the reputation and value that they have of being a successful settlement based on animancy. It's like, well, is animancy actually helpful? Or did animancy actually cause this? Because you got to remember, there's always this debate going on within the world of, is animancy actually bad for the world? You know, is messing around with souls and essence, which is stuff that living things and the souls of which are made of, is messing with that stuff bad? You know, is it immoral? Is it messing with things that maybe we shouldn't be messing around with, you know? And so the idea that perhaps animancy might be causing the Dream Scourge is definitely things people are talking about within the world that this game is set in. Fior is settled, and Vidaro kind of relinquishes his leadership position, which is fair, especially as a Skaenite. Once you start becoming a leader above other people, I think now there's some weird tension that exists there if you're a Skaenite worshiper, because it's like, well, now you're the corporate overlord, if you will, and people might be praying to Skaen to overthrow you and your oppressive boot, even if you think you're a good person. Other people might disagree. And I guess the real question is, would Skaen agree with that? But anyways, so I've always thought there's some weird tension there, but he relinquishes his position, and the community directs itself. And he grows in his relationship with his god Skaen, which is really interesting to me, and I'm sure a lot of other Pillars nerds as well, that there is this person who has such a, what seems to be almost morally positive connection and relationship with a vastly, I would say, evil god, but that's just, again, my own kind of opinion. So it, like, Maxim Vidaro's relationship with the god Skaen for me has been a very interesting one, and it's made me rethink how, like, a person could roleplay as a Skaenite worshiper and what other stories could be told within the world of Eora.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
Now, beyond just reading this on the Wikipedia article, or the fandom article, I suppose, there are some actual pieces of lore from the game itself that we can read. Specifically, I want to turn our attention to Maxim Vidaro's journal. So this is actually something we can find in the game, and this is the journal to the person, Maxim Vidaro, who founded Fior Mes Iverno. And it's dated, at least by a year, perhaps, anyways. And so we can read kind of like what was going on with his thoughts about why he was doing what he's doing and how he grew as a person throughout the years. Maxim Vidaro's journal starts off with an entry dated 2781 AI, and so this is around the time that they would have been leaving the Republics. It says, "We are finally leaving the Republics. I never thought I could convince so many to join this bitter Skaenite crusade, but it seems I do not grind my axe alone. When Spirento realizes that I have absconded with the best of their animancers, they will beg me to take my place at the seat of power. It's only a matter of time." So here we see the Skaenite faith influence that Maxim Vidaro has. So he's planning on leaving the Republics, and he's going to take all these people with him who are very powerful, or very useful anyways, within the city of Spirento, and he's going to use this kind of as leverage, I guess, to say, hey, you know, that political position you didn't give me in the Sangreda Ducala, maybe you should rethink that, buddies. And, you know, so they'll come begging for him to come back. And this is a very Skaenite thing to do. However, in 2783, we have an entry that just says, "I have a son." And that's it. It's just, "I have a son," which I think speaks volumes of like, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into now, right? 3 years later, so we have 2781, 2 years later he has a son, and then 2790, which is 7 years later, he has an entry that says, "Fior Mes Iverno is thriving beyond my wildest dreams. Ignacy is healthy, as is Estelle. The living lands will always be the frontier to me, but this island is his homeland, his birthright. How could I ask him to leave?" So here we're starting to see a little bit of conflict that Maxim has, right? He has his son, who would be around 7 years old at this time, and his wife, Estelle. They're in the living lands, which is, as he says, a frontier to him. This is not his home. But to his son, this is his homeland. This is where he's been born and raised and has formed a lot of these core memories. And if at any point Spirento was to send word to Maxim saying like, hey, come back with the Animancers and you have a seat on the council, how could Maxim ask Ignacy to leave? How could he ask him to do that? And I think as a Skaenite, he probably is mindful of the idea that, like, would I not be oppressive towards my son? Like, could my son, if he knew enough, not pray to the god that I also pray to, that I would be removed from the situation? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a little bit, if you know stuff about Skain, which, by the way, I've done an episode on if you want to hear more about him, like, there's a lot there that I think is really going to be kind of a faith issue for Maxim. Like, how do I navigate this particular situation? And obviously, if you played Avowed, he chooses to stay, or at least to some degree chooses to stay. 2 years later, he has an entry, 2792 AI. The settlement practically runs itself these days. I have some ceremonial authority over the Animancers, but I often choose not to wield it. They have big plans for Fior and its agriculture. I would only get in their way. So it's around this time, which is his son would be 9 years old at this time, that Maxim pulls away from leadership and lets Fior Mes Iverno govern itself. In 2795 AI, he writes, "In my restless wanderings, I found a cave that leads into some of the precursor ruins. The isolation, the quiet, are my oldest friends. I no longer dream of the Sangreta Ducala. Estelle understands. Someday Ignacy will too." So at this point, his son is around 12 years old. He has been wandering restlessly around the area, and he's found a cave that he says is in some precursor ruins. That's the Godless Ruins. If you've been playing Avowed, you'll be familiar with the Godless Ruins at this point, especially at this point in the game. And he finds a place to be isolated and quiet. And so it says here that he doesn't dream of the Sangreta Ducala anymore. And he mentions that his wife will understand, and maybe one day his son will as well. And I'm guessing that this has something to do with the religious relationship that he has with Skain. Perhaps it is that when we have a target of our hatred and vengeance that we have been praying to Skain for, that you have dreams of them. Perhaps Skain keeps these in your dreams to fuel that hatred, so you'll continue your worship. Or perhaps it's just like part of the deal of like, okay, like I'm going to bless you, but you're going to be having constant updates about how they're doing or something like that, or who knows. But he has stopped dreaming of them. And so I think that means that he has kind of let go of this faith-based campaign against the Sangreta Ducala. So he's no longer doing the thing which he came here to do, which is take these Animancers away, start a city so that he can use it as leverage to basically get a seat on the council. It seems that he has let go of this. Or perhaps there is a degree to which maybe Skain has let go of it for him? I don't know. And the next entry is many years later, 28 years later, in the year 2823 AI, which is actually around when Pillars of Eternity 1 starts. It has been some time since I last penned my thoughts. The resentful Skaenite who set sail for the living lands is dead. A tired, content old man has taken his place. And yet Skain is never far from my thoughts. Not as a skinless force of terror, but as a catalyst of change, an upsetter of norms. Here in the wilderness, I think I have found more communion with the effigy than I ever did in my defiance. Ignacy is a good man. I have no reservations about leaving Fior Mes Iverno, my legacy, in his capable hands. I must rest. Maxim would be a pretty old man at this point in time, and so who knows? It sounds like something happened. But anyways, to get a little more into the lore of what he's talking about here, he says the resentful Skaenite who set sail for the living lands is dead. And this is obviously alluding to what I just mentioned, how he's kind of let go of this Skaenite crusade that he has. He probably let go of it a long time ago, but he just happens to be writing in his journal and see what he was writing about last time. And almost as an update, it seems like he's saying, oh yeah, that old Skaenite follower, he's dead. Like, I'm not doing that thing anymore. But he has had such a connection to his god Skain that he's never far from his thoughts. He's a Skaenite follower through and through. But he doesn't see Skain as the skinless force of terror, as a lot of people often associate that god to, but as a changer of norms, an upsetter, or a catalyst of change, and an upsetter of norms. Which is where, like I said, Skain is an evil god just for evil's sake, right? Like, he definitely has been associated with a lot of evil stuff, but there is a degree to which it's like trying to release the oppressed people from an oppressor, theoretically speaking anyways. There is a good thing that can come out of that. And so there is this positive relationship that Maxim has with Skain that I've always been interested in seeing in the games that is set within Eora, and it's cool to see this even in journal form in Avowed. And so there we have Fior Mes Iverno and its founder, Maxim Vidaro. Now, we've talked a lot about Skain, and there's some stuff that I do want to touch on in regards to Skain, because I think it's pretty interesting. But I don't want to dive too much into it because I don't want these episodes to be too long because I don't have a lot of time, like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode. But there's definitely one thing I want to kind of like backtrack on and talk about here, and that is this title of Flower of Winter by Maxim Vidaro, which I think also supports the thing I said earlier about Fior Mes Iverno being Flower of Winter, the translation of it. This is I thought it was a poem originally, but it seems to be basically, I think this is Maxim Vidaro's not a manifesto. I don't know what word I want to use. Basically, it seems to be his campaign against Speranto in the first. I think this really outlines his original Skaenite reason for wanting to go on this campaign of vengeance in the first place. It reads, "The Valian Republics swindled me out of the Sangreta Ducala, denied me my born right to lead Speranto's government. I would not take such insults lying down. Skain was behind me all along, whispering into my ear, caressing my shoulder with skinless fingers. Together, we sowed a revolution. Now you can actually taste the fruit it bore. I can only imagine the day Speranto awoke to discover the empty halls of academia, the pillaged libraries. Where did our brightest minds go? Where are the animancers? They blamed me, yet had no one to blame but themselves. We journeyed to this frontier in defiance of the Valian Republics. We remain because our community is a living revolution, proof that we can thrive without a golden chain about our necks." Feels kind of weird to end this episode off, at least the lore section, with starting off with this violent, rebellious nature of Maxim, and then seeing Fior be founded and Maxim have a family and grow to be this person where he thinks of Skain, his god, in a more positive light. And then for me to kind of come back and be like, oh yeah, but let's not forget his original intent. It feels weird to kind of go back on that. But that's because I always want to keep this interesting balance. Right? Like when I'm looking at the lore, just like I think Obsidian does, because I love the writing that they do. Like there's very clear indications within the games, especially in Pillars of Eternity 1, we see a really good instance of this, of people associated with Skain being very evil. And role-playing as a Skaenite, you can be really evil. But the more you dive into the lore, the more you see there could be some positive aspects to it. And I think Fior Mes Iverno and Maxim Vidaro really show that off. But I don't want to just remember them as a positive thing. Like, oh, actually, Skaenites are good people. Well, we have this instance here where we saw Maxim and what was all of his motivation when he left in the first place? Why did he leave Speranto? Why did he uproot a whole bunch of people to uproot their lives and take on this dangerous journey across the ocean to settle this city that they were in? Why did he do that? Because he wanted a seat of power, right? And while Fior Mes Iverno worked out, that was a lot of people that followed him for something that was basically his own revenge conquest. And it seems like he was even willing to go back there if they were willing to give him perhaps a seat of power. Like that, we don't get that directly, but who knows? He might have been willing to do that very thing. And I'm going to end off this lore section with a piece of lore that we get from Pillars of Eternity 1. So, the game from several years ago, well over a decade at this point. And this is called Skaenite scripture. So this is like a piece of Skaenite Bible, if you will. It reads, "Burn, feel thy hatred twist within thee, feed thyself on its bile, sustain thyself on its anger. This hatred, this bile, this anger, these shall be the tools for thy rebellion. Let thine heart seethe. There is no satisfaction in open confrontation. Hide thine hatred. Let it grow, that it may fester. Make thy plots in secret. The quiet slave stays in the shadows. His face seeks not the light. In darkness doth he work. In darkness doth he move. Rebel against those that seek to control thee. Rebel against those that wish to remove thee." Thus concludes the reading of Skaenite Scripture by Gingerino. Anyways, that's not a very uplifting and positive Bible scripture, you know what I'm saying? That's pretty dark. Feel the hatred twist within thee, its bile, its anger, hold these in, right? And keep it secret, let it fester, because, the quiet slave, which is another name for Skain, stays in the shadows. His face seeks not the light. So, I don't know if you've ever held on to a secret or if you've held on to hatred or a grudge. It's not really good for you in the long run, right? So, this is some pretty dark stuff that we're dealing with here. Even though I would say a lot of stuff that ends up happening to Maxim and to Fior end up in a very positive, good kind of way. And yet this is kind of where a lot of that faith originates from. I find that tension interesting, me personally. But what about you? I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say. If you have any thoughts or insights to this as well, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the matter, whether you agree or disagree or what have you. And we're going to end the lore segment of today's episode there, but I do want to kind of whet your appetite a little bit more. If you haven't dove into the game of Avowed, where you've picked up every book and you've read every single thing, I just read the Skaenite scripture, which is a book that comes from Pillars of Eternity, but you can actually also find that in Ignacy Vidaro's office in the city of Fior. There's also another book in there called the Final Journal of Jonas. I always mix that one up. Final Journal of Jonas. That is another form of Skaenite script. It's essentially a letter or journal entry by a Skaenite man named Jonas. And it shows him penning his thoughts to his son as he's about to undergo a rather brutal ritual to become what is known as the effigy. The effigy being a horrific thing within this world, which if you're interested in learning more about, you can listen to my episode on Skaen, or you can dive into some lore online, or you can go and read this yourself. Load up Avowed on your Xbox or your computer, whatever, or on your phone if you're playing through the cloud, whatever it is that you're doing, and go to Ignacy's office, pick up the Final Journal of Jonas, give it a read, because that's also a piece of Skaenite scripture, if you will. And then ask yourself, while you're reading this in Ignacy Vidaro's office, like, how did a person who believes in journal entries like this create such an interesting city like Fior Mes Iverno? That's all for today's episode, and we're going to close out from here.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
So the only thing I have really to close off with is thanks for listening, everybody. I'm sorry I haven't had episodes out on my regular cadence. It's really good to get back behind the microphone, and hopefully I can find a regular period of time each week to either record or edit, and so I can get this stuff out to you. If you have any thoughts about the podcast or about the game, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @worldofeora. If you're interested in supporting this show, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofeora. As far as what I've been playing lately, which is something I'd keep y'all updated on in case you want to have a conversation about games commonly played, I played Atomfall over the last couple of weeks, which was, I actually really enjoyed it, but then right at the end, I just stopped playing. I don't know why. I could see the end in sight. Literally, I could see the end of the game, and I had everything set up to end the game, but it was like a half hour or 45 minutes of stuff to do to get to the end, and I'm like, no, I'm good, and I just didn't finish it. So instead, I have started playing Blue Prince on Game Pass, and I've hit a wall already. Like, I'm stuck on that game, but it's very cool, very cool. I'm not going to talk about it much because I think talking about it spoils some of the greatness about what Blue Prince offers, but definitely if you have Game Pass, go and check it out. It's a great game for the price of Game Pass on its own, especially if you're playing other games on there. But honestly, if you have Game Pass Ultimate, it's kind of the same price. You maybe just buy it if that's what you want to do. And who knows, it might take you a month to beat. I've only gotten a few days into it. It's really interesting. It's like a puzzle roguelite. Like, that's crazy. It's a crazy genre description, but that's what it is. And I'm having a lot of aha eureka moments, and I'm learning the hidden rules of this game. But man, it's sometimes the randomness of the roguelike elements of it is a little frustrating, but I can't wait to see the end. God willing that I get there. And yeah, I'm pushing through that right now. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode on the Skaenite origins on the city of Fior Mes Iverno. If you like today's episode, let me know. If you have requests for future episodes, let me know. I know someone recently sent me an email hoping that I will expound on the end of the game of Avowed, and that's definitely something I want to do. And at this point, I'm not too worried about spoilers, but I will still give spoiler warnings when it's related. And I do plan on touching on that subject. But I have a lot of stuff between now and the end of Avowed that I would also like to discuss before doing that. So, but it's definitely on the list. And when people like that make requests, it makes me move that up the list in terms of priority. So if you have something you want me to look at or have questions you want answered, send me an email, worldofeora@gmail.com. Thanks everyone for listening to today's episode. I've been your host, Eric, aka Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.